All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started on vegetable gardening presentation. Most of y'all know I'm Timothy Daly, a county extension agent with University of Georgia Extension here in Gwinnett County. The spring is here and it's time to begin planting our vegetable gardens. And I will first of all put this on full screen. Okay, so the most successful vegetable garden is well planned. Most garden problems are more easily prevented than solved once they occur. Planning it out, figuring out how much you want, what you want to plant helps. Very important, just to got an idea, there's many, you can have a large vegetable garden of several thousand square feet or something as small as just 1 4x8 raised bed or even containers. They can be grown in containers. I know a lot of the community gardens around here have the raised beds. All right, you go ahead and plan out what do you want to plant. We're going to talk about many vegetables, several vegetables we can plant. Also, if you have leftover vegetables that grow more than you need, consider donating them to a food bank, especially right now with the current situation going on. If you're going to plant growing vegetable gardens, you're essentially going to need to have you're going to essentially need to have full sun all day long. Now, if it gets a little morning shade or a little afternoon shade, that's fine, but it is important that they get full sun. Now, plant the shorter vegetables in front, plant them in east-west rows, and plant the shorter vegetables in front, the lower growing ones like the squash here, and the taller ones like the corn in the rear, so they don't shade each other out. Sorry, oh, went ahead too far. All right, watering is very important. The garden won't do well unless it has water. This is a picture of some corn growing at the University of Georgia Stripling Irrigation Research Farm in Camilla, Georgia, which is down below Albany. And I think many of you are familiar with those big boom irrigation devices that you see, like if you're driving down I-75 or I-16, or any area down there in South Georgia where the majority of these row crops are, you'll see those boom irrigations. Well, this is on the very outer edge where it comes in, and you can see where some of the corn is not getting as much water as the others. So having that supplemental water is important. Also making sure the soil is well drained. That's another thing it needs to have because vegetables, they do not grow well in waterlogged soils. So there are several things we need to discuss when it comes to vegetable garden. We talk some about pH and fertility. pH is a measurement of the acidity and alkalinity of the soil. Neutral is 7, below 7 it is said to be acid, above 7 is alkaline or basic. The ideal pH for most plants is between 6 to 6.5. As you can see by this chart right here, you have your major nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, or macronutrients. The secondary macronutrients, calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. And then you have the minor nutrients, or micronutrients, iron, zinc, manganese, copper, boron, molybdenum. And you see here where it says aluminum, but aluminum is not a plant nutrient. It can be toxic to plants in higher quantities. So, and you start getting into that lower pH range, you can see where a lot of, or even too high a pH, but also the lower pH, where the nutrient availability isn't as good. Although you can see where iron is more available. That's why some plants need more acidic soils, because they need more iron. We're looking at your azaleas, rhododendrons, camellias, mountain laurels, blueberries, centipede grass, to name a few. And also you can see why some plants would suffer if the pH is too low, the aluminum becomes too high. Um, the, so at a lower pH, we mentioned below 4.5, aluminum, manganese, even iron can reach toxic levels. Soil organisms do best at a pH near neutral. Acidic soils can disrupt the activities of soil organisms, although with those acid-growing plants, those acid-loving plants, they're able to grow all right. Well, to raise the pH, you apply a lime. The lower the pH, you apply a sulfur or a fertilizer with a sulfate ion, such as ammonium sulfate, aluminum sulfate, etc. To make sure, and the best way to do it is to have your soil tested through UGA extension. Having your soil tested, it's $8 per sample, is your best course of action. So it'll tell you what the pH is, what the nutrient content, how much you need to put out, and so forth. And it's like I tell people, you know, do you need, I had an email recently, somebody asking about, does lime need to be applied to their lawn? I say, well, you need to have it tested, because I know like a lot of lawn care companies will go around and put, well, we just want your lawns every year. Well, your lawn may not need to be limed. I'm just using lawns as an example, because a lot of people pay to have that done. It needs to be tested. Also, the pure clay soil is kind of rough on. I mean, you can grow vegetable plants in there, but you may not get the best growth, especially for things like tomatoes, peppers, squash, and plants like that. Your corn, it can handle the clay soil better. You know, it's often it's grown commercially. Okra does too. But what is best to have is organic amendments. Those are things like compost, cow manure, peat moss, topsoil, and the like. Now, very important thing is the plant to use organic matter in the soil. With all these storms, just like this recent storm we had, trees have been blown down. You have a tree care company have a tree that's down, and the tree care company chips it up and leaves some of the wood chips behind. It's best not to incorporate that in the soil, because those wood chips have what is referred to as a high carbon to nitrogen ratio, meaning it's going to take longer to break down. And what's going on, and if you put it directly into the soil, as it's breaking down in composting, it'll suck nutrients. The microbes doing that will suck nutrients out of the soil, so you can have a nutrient deficiency. However, it is perfectly all right to use those wood chips on top of the soil as a mulch. Now, once it's composted and broken down, though, it can be incorporated. How long that takes, so that just depends on the type of wood. It takes on environmental conditions and the like. It could take a few months to a year or more. Now, another thing is, when we're talking about this cow manure or horse manure, there's a little caution I want to give you. Fresh cow manure or fresh horse manure can, a lot of these pasture managers, they use herbicides to control weeds out on their pastures. And what happens is, a lot of times these animals will graze, and that they'll eat what the herbicide will go through their system, and then their manure. And if you bring fresh manure back, you could potentially be bringing some herbicides back to your garden. So it's best not to use fresh manure. That you need to want some that's been composted down a few months. This black cow manure that you see, if you see in the garden centers, is perfectly all right. So that does help. Now, often I get questions about organic fertilizers, like what about, instead of synthetic fertilizers, what about using an organic fertilizer like bone meal, cottonseed meal, fish emulsion? Also these organics like the cow manure and so forth. And yes, you can use that as strictly as fertilizer, but there's several things you need to take into consideration. One thing is in an organic form, and it has to be broken down into an inorganic form, into a form where the nutrients are available to the plant. That varies how long it takes for the microbes to do that. A lot of things, weather conditions, soil conditions, and so forth. Also, these organic fertilizers are not high in nutrient content. So, like if you look here and you see cow manure 0.5-0.5-5, that's the percentage of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium that's in there. So it's quite low. So only work the garden with a tiller or spade when the soil moisture is right. Don't do it when it's wet because you'll mess up the soil structure. I know I had a situation with my community garden a few years back. Some people had tilled the soil when it was too wet, and it messed up the soil structure. It was kind of hard and like concrete, especially if there's clay soil. So here's a way, like today, you know, it rained last night. You might want to wait a couple days before you till it up. With the wind and the sun, the soil should dry out at a fairly reasonable period of time. Now here's the test. You get a ball of that garden soil, and yes, don't be afraid to get your hands dirty because you know, working in vegetable gardens, that's just part of the job of doing it. Squeeze that soil into a ball, and if it remains like that, it remains solid, that means that soil's too messed up. I mean, it's not it's too wet to be used, to be worked with a tiller. You need to if you ball it up and it breaks apart, that means it's dry enough. Then you can use the tiller in order to till it up. How about soil temperature? This right here, this GeorgiaWeather.net will show, click on the nearest town and then current conditions. Soilweather.net, that is a Georgia automated environmental monitoring network. There's several sites throughout the state. They have air temperatures, soil temperatures, and they have historical data. And you could the ones that are closest to Gwinnett would be Alpharetta, Johns Creek, and Oakwood. Oakwood is up there near Gainesville, so that's a little north. But soil raised beds are very good. Soil temperatures, we're right at the time where they need to be. Soil temperatures are right for planting. Raised beds are very popular. There's basically they should be no wider than 4 feet apart, and they can be at varying lengths. Need 4 feet apart and no more because that makes it easier to work with. As you can see in this picture, the organic amendments are being put into the raised bed. What you need to do is mix those organic amendments up with the native soil that's already under there. Because if you just use the organic amendments, they don't hold water that well. They drain too quick, and I've noticed in a lot of cases they're a little too alkaline. If you mix it with the native soil, you'll get a better mixture of soil. So that's a good thing. Raised beds are like they can be. You can use wood. Pressure treated wood's okay. It's not going to leach out any chemicals. Studies have shown. They can also use you can use rocks. You can use cinder blocks for them as well. Bricks, but avoid using railroad ties because they will have potentially toxic chemicals that can leach out. So avoid using them. One thing to remember with raised beds, as it's like above ground, it's like containers and window hanging baskets and window boxes. They tend to dry out a lot quicker. So you have to just watch the water. Make sure they don't get too dry. Putting a little 1 to 3 inch layer of mulch on top would help. This is a picture of a garden with some raised beds. Can't remember where this was taken, but it's not my garden. I wish I had a place like this. Yes, it's getting a little bit of that morning shade. That's fine, but it gets full sun during the day. Now, some vegetables can be planted and grown directly from seeds. As you can see the list, like beans, beets, cantaloupe, cucumbers, squash, spinach. leaf lettuce and so forth, you can just directly plant them into the ground and go with that. Also, you can use transplants. You can buy the little transplants that you see at the garden centers or grow your own transplants like demonstrated here. And that they're usually other like tomatoes and peppers are grown and some herbs are grown from transplants. All right, when you're planting the transplants, put it level with the root, the top of the root ball. Don't plant it any deeper than the top of the root ball, except for tomatoes. You can plant them deeper because they form advantageous roots on their stems. Pack it down good around there and then apply water. Spray water. Best thing to do is when you're watering your vegetable garden, if at all possible, do it earlier in the day before noon so it can dry out and keep the foliage dry. Of course, when they're very small, that's not going to be, that's something you can't do. But once they get larger and bigger, especially like tomatoes, in those cages, you don't need to water the whole plant. Just direct the water at the base of the roots of the plant, and that will help them grow. And it keeps the water off the foliage so it will be less likely to get a disease. We talked a little bit about before, fertilizer is important to make sure you have good fertilizer. You should, many different types of fertilizer. They essentially, they need to have the NPK ratio. We talked about this a few minutes ago, the cow manure. That is a percentage that, the percentage of that nutrient that's within the fertilizer. So NPK, that's nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. This would be a 50-pound bag of fertilizer. It's got 10% of each of one of those nutrients. And so you would have 10% of 50 is 5, so you have 15 pounds of fertilizer, the nutrients, and 35 pounds of filler material. And 10-10-10 is a very commonly used one, but there's many others that can be used as well. Irrigation, again, keeping the plants watered. You can hand water it with a wand or use irrigation systems. Again, that's a water wand. I use that, but make sure that water is directed at the base of the plant. Also, you can use, there's a lot of creative ways you can do drip irrigation right here. This is a good form because it gets the water directly to the plant. It's not overhead spraying where you waste a lot of water, a lot of evaporation, and that would also increase the likelihood of diseases. Now, some failures in the garden that we got to look at, some issues. I'm not going to go too much into pest and disease control because I'm going to have a separate program that coming up in early June. But anyhow, one thing is, one of the biggest things you're going to have is a war on weeds. Now, if you got a raised beds, it's a little easier to deal with that, but conventionally, it's going to be a problem. I know in my community garden, we got a lot of problems with that. I mean, it's just an ever-ending battle on weeds. Best to get weeds when they're young, where they're not as troublesome. Several things. I would recommend, again, spraying herbicides in your vegetable garden, round up other ones, because anything that'll get the weeds will hurt your vegetable plants. So avoid that. Hand pulling, hoeing is a good way. Another good one is using mulch. A 1 to 3 inch layer of wood chips, pine straw, wheat straw, pine bark, cypress mulch, but do not use rocks, gravel, or marble because that holds heat, radiates heat, and it will cook your plants. So avoid using that. Also, what we call these garden mats, the landscape fabrics can be used. Don't use plastic because if you use plastic, the air and water infiltration will be inhibited, and if the soil's wet, you could potentially get root rot. Now, commercial growers will use plastic, but they got a specific method they're using that's very highly specialized But for us, we need to avoid that. These landscape fabrics that are permeable, that the water and air can go down, it can exchange that, and it helps reduce weeds. Also, newspaper can help, but don't use the glossy magazines or anything like that. But the newspaper print material is fine, and you can put that down and maybe throw a little pine straw or pine bark over it, kind of hold it down and cover it up sun. There's some very creative ways to do that. Now, another thing is, I say we're not going to talk too much about diseased insects here, but crop rotation is a good idea. Crop rotation is where these different families of plants. The solanaceous are your eggplants, potatoes, peppers, tomatoes. Also includes petunias. It includes tobacco in it. Legumes are the peas, beans, and peanuts. Cucurbits, cantaloupes, cucumbers, pumpkin squash, and watermelons. Cold crops, broccoli, cabbage, collards. They tend to be more cool weather plants, and so forth. What you don't want to grow is the same plant in the same family of plants in the same place every year if at all possible. You need to rotate it. So like this year we'll have the solanaceous plant, and next year in that spot you'll put the cucurbits, and then it's best to go 2 to 3 years without planting them in the same place, because if you keep growing something in the same place year after year, pests will build up, and you could have insect and disease problems. Staggered planting times for some things. I know corn. I always wait a little later than now to plant corn. Let the soil temperatures kind of warm up a little bit more, probably toward the end of April. But what you need to do, you can plant 2 rows of it this week, 1 week, 2 rows of it the following week, and 2 rows the week after, and so forth. So your staggered planting time, so you'll get the corn will be maturing at different times, so you don't get them all at one time. You get them all over a period of time. Beans are also good to do that way, staggered planting times. Resistant varieties. Some tomatoes are resistant to certain diseases. I'll talk about that in a little bit. Resistance to insect disease is something that a lot of the newer varieties have. So we're going to go into some of the types of vegetables. All right, first of all, this is a vegetable planting chart that you can get from UGA Extension. I can send you a copy if you email me. I have my email at the end. This is it shows the vegetable, days to maturity, cultivars, spring and fall planting dates, how many seeds per 100 feet, spacing rows per plant, depth to plant, how deep to plant those seeds. And as you can see, it covers a lot of them. So that's a very good chart to have. It kind of more for the whole state, but this is mainly more for the North Georgia. Warm season crops, these are the ones that are grown in warm seasons that you see on the list there. And there's others as well. As opposed to your cool season crops, the collards, kale, cabbage, radishes, turnips, rutabagas, and so forth, onions. That'll be a separate class in August. We'll have a couple classes on that. Hopefully we'll be able to get back and get out and teach in the community again. So look forward to that. Your cool season vegetables are probably finishing their growth cycle, so it'll be time to start pulling them out and put the summer ones in. Beans are very popular. They're easy to grow. There's many different types. There's pole beans, which are vines, and bush beans are bushes. It's important that you know to get what you're getting. Or is it a pole bean or a bush bean? You plant so you don't mistakenly get the wrong thing. I know one year I purchased some beans and planted them, and I was wondering why they were trailing vines all over the ground. Apparently I bought bush pole beans when I meant to buy bush beans. Pick these pods when they get to about 4 to 6 inches long. And the reason why is that it keeps the plant producing. We'll talk about like squashes, cucumbers, and okra. This applies to. You want because if they get too big, they become kind of hard to eat, and also will cause the plant to shut down production. You want to keep picking them, and they are prolific. Now, beans do have a problem with the Mexican bean beetle. And a couple ways, I always say 7 works, but if you don't want to use pesticides, just go and try to hand pick them the best you can. The beetles, they look like they look like lady beetles. They're related to lady beetles, but they're not good bugs. They're bad bugs, and they lay their eggs, and their immature forms looks like little pin cushions, little yellow pin cushions. Peas, there are many different types of peas. Summer peas or snap peas, excuse me, black-eyed peas, field peas, purple cow peas, and so forth. They can be planted this time of the year. Not to be, there's not to be confused with the English or snap peas that are grown, or snow peas as it's sometimes called. Those are full season peas that are grown in the early spring and then the fall. You could probably still plant some right now, but we're getting kind of at the end of the planting. They can tolerate cooler weather. But these other peas grow great during the warm weather, and they're actually good for the soil because they're legumes and they have little nodules in the bottom of their roots. That's a symbiotic relationship with bacteria that fixate the nitrogen into the soil, so they help increase soil fertility. Cucumbers, these are vines, so you'll need to have them trellis or something to support them. There are several different types. They kind of grow them in different sizes. Some varieties are great for pickling, but they're really, cucumbers are easy to grow. Now, remember, the one thing is I was mentioning, if they get too big, they become not as palatable, and it causes the plant to shut down production. They won't be as productive. Now, one thing you got to remember with cucumbers, as well as that, the green zucchini squash, is to thoroughly check under those leaves and make sure you pick them when they're small, because they can camouflage themselves, and suddenly you get under and find a cucumber as big as a football. And that's easy to do. I know that happens to me every year, no matter how hard I try and I'll find one that I missed. So just kind of word to the wise on that. But they're easy to grow, and they're very productive. You plant several cucumber plants, and you'll have more than you need.
Hello.
Yes. Hey, Marcy.
Sorry.
Eggplant is another one. That's a good plant to grow. There's in that solaniferous plants. There are several different types. They're used in a variety of dishes. One of my favorite vegetables. They're pretty easy to grow. They have these flea beetles that'll get into their leaves and make holes. But the best way to control that, using the 7 will work, and several other insecticides. But my eggplants, I didn't put any on there, and I had a pretty good crop of eggplants. The flea beetles ate the leaves and still had a good crop. So you don't necessarily need to apply a pesticide to everything. You can tolerate some pest damage. That's called threshold, which is a word I use with the commercial people. There's another picture of an eggplant. You see some of them holes in the leaves of the flea beetles, but otherwise it looks like it's happy and healthy. Okra, that's a favorite among many. It's best, let's wait till around May 1st to let that soil warm up some, because they really like the warm, hot weather. Okra is actually a family of plants that's related to cotton and hibiscus. So if you see the flower, it looks like a hibiscus. Cotton has a flower shaped like that as well. Okra can grow 6 to 8 feet tall and produce these pods. Pick the pods when they're 4 to 6 inches long and do that on a continual basis so they don't get too big. Again, they can cause the plant to have shutdown. And they're very prolific. I know I get these things on my okra, these root knot nematodes. Nematodes are these little microscopic worms that get on the roots, and they can stunt the root and cause these little nodules to form, the root knot nematode. I still get I get them really bad on my okra, but I still get a bumper crop of okra. So there's no need. Well, actually, there is no pesticide label for controlling nematodes. There are some, but that's for commercial. They're toxic, and that's for highly specialized situations. But you don't need. They also can get on tomatoes sometimes as well. There's a picture of an oak pod ready to be cut. There's the flower right there. Now another one are peppers. They're very popular, easy to grow. Best to get those from transplants, but you can grow them from seeds if you want. It's important to know if you're getting a hot pepper or a sweet pepper. Bell peppers and banana peppers, the sweet banana peppers have very little hotness, if any, in them. The other ones can be some of them can get extremely hot, like the jalapenos and habaneros. It's best not to put kind of know what kind of peppers you're getting instead of accidentally sticking one in your mouth and setting it on fire. I did that accidentally one when I was tasting someone else's peppers in a garden that a friend had, and I told me to try one of those peppers, and I said, well, I'll just give it a shot, and that was the first and last time I wanted to touch one of those peppers. But some people eat the hot peppers, without they doesn't bother them. So just remember, and there's some different multicolored bell peppers. They're easy to grow. Get those planted. Now's a good time to put them out. Those look like the ornamental peppers, which are extremely hot. They're edible, but I don't know if I want to eat them or not. Pumpkins. Like to have those big old jack-o'-lanterns for Halloween. Well, now's a good time to be planting the pumpkins. If you want super-sized pumpkins, now you need to get an early start. If you don't want those big pumpkins, you do need to have plenty of room to let the vine grow because they like to spread out and grow everywhere. It's something that would not be good for a raised bed. It would not be good. So you would need a lot of room. And once the pumpkin starts forming, put some pine straw or cardboard or something to raise it up off the ground a little bit so it won't rot. Make sure it gets plenty of fertilizer and water. Every year at the Gwinnett County Fair, Extension works them to have our field crop exhibit. That's that first Saturday of the fair. I think it's I think the fair opens on the 17th of September, so that would be the 19th, Saturday. Don't hold me to that, but I think that's what it is. And we have people bring, if you have these vegetables, you can bring them into our field crop contest and win small cash prizes. And one thing I'm always looking for is super-sized pumpkins and watermelons. So if you got a super-sized pumpkin and watermelon, bring them on in. I'm still waiting that pumpkin I haven't gotten it, but I still want to see a pumpkin so big they got to get a forklift. But you don't have to grow them that big. They have many uses. Summer squash is a favorite. The yellow crookneck, the straight crookneck, and the zucchinis. But this is important. You need to pick them before they get too big. They're about 6 inches long because they can they'll do the same thing. They'll get too tough to eat and cause a plant to produce less. Again, with these, it's not as problematic with the yellow ones, but the green zucchini, again, gotta be very, very careful. Go through the beds thoroughly to pick them, because you might overlook one that's camouflaged and get one that's too big. There's some squash in a bed right there. They grow pretty good. I know that they do have some pest problems, and I know the squash vine borer is one. That's just a type of caterpillar that is a clear wing moth that lays that. Get some put some 7 along the vine works. If you don't want to use that, get something more organic would be the BT. It's a bacteria that targets just a caterpillar pest and nothing else. It's sold under the trade names of Dipel, that's DIPEL, or Thuricide. They're liquid in powder. Once that borer gets in the vine, there's nothing you can apply to get rid of it. You need to get an X-Acto knife or razor and go in there and pull it out and put soil on top of it. And just to be forewarned, those borers are very sneaky. They sneak into your squash before you know it. I had some last year, so you have to kind of keep an eye on it. Summer squash, there's a difference. It's winter squash now. This doesn't mean that it grows during the winter. What this means is, unlike the summer squash, you leave it on the vine as long as possible. And toward the end of the season is when you harvest it. And in the days before refrigeration, that was put in cellars and kept over winter. That's where it gets its name. Butternut, spaghetti squash, acorn squash, several other squashes like that. That's the winter squash. Great squash to grow. This is spaghetti squash. That's one of my favorites. Here's a storage area where and as I said, the days before refrigeration, this was and they're still stored like this. And I know that it's in a lot of third world countries, they really know how to. They don't have refrigeration. They use this method of storage and growing these. They're really they're good, but remember the summer squash, the footnecks and the zucchinis, you want to pick those before they get too big. Pollination is very important. I get people calling say they're not getting any squash, even though they see blossoms. Well, several they're pollinated. There's male and female flowers. They're pollinated by various bees out there. And if the weather's cool and overcast for a period of time, or if it's extremely hot, you won't get that good of pollination. Well, you can play pollinator yourself. Male flowers are on a long stalk. Female flowers are on a short stalk with a bulge behind them. You can get a Q-tip or paintbrush, wipe it off the male flowers and put it on the female flowers, and you can play pollinator bee yourself doing that. Sometimes if they don't get good pollination, the fruits will be misshapen. You'll still get fruit, but it's not doesn't look that good. Here's another good one, sweet corn. Silver Queen and Silver King are two popular hybrids, two of the most popular. Corn, you do need to have some room. Again, this is not something you want to put in a raised bed. You need to plant them about 18 inches apart, and the rows should be spaced about 3 feet apart, or thereabouts. Plant them. They do need water, but they're not quite as they don't have as heavy of a water requirement as some of the other vegetables do. But they do need to have a little supplemental water. So when you're buying, basically in the garden centers, you get the sweet corn, but there's also another kind called field corn, which is made more for corn syrup and animal feed. Well, it can be eaten, but it doesn't taste that. It's not that easy to eat. So make sure you always get the sweet corn. Another one are the sweet potatoes that are popular. They're not potatoes. They're not related to potatoes, that family of plants. They're actually they're related to morning glories. You know those viney weeds that take over your garden? Well, this is a close relative. Plant them in the little slips of potatoes. Sweet potatoes are planted in the early spring. Sometimes there are transplants you can put out and let them grow. Now they're going to need room to spread out, and their vines, they can be overweeded sometimes. got to be careful about that. Keep the weeds under control. In the fall, you can dig them up, cure them, make sure you don't bruise them, and put them in a place where they get good storage, where it's cool and out of direct sunlight. Here's everyone's favorite, the most popular, tomatoes. I get more questions on tomatoes than any other plant, any other vegetable. There's basically, we can divide tomatoes into two types, the determinate and the indeterminate. Determinants produce all their fruit pretty much at one time and then start to decline. Those are ones like Bush Early Girl and Bush Beefsteak are examples. And what they do is they grow and they produce all their fruit at one time. And that's ones for like tomatoes for cooking purposes, like to make tomato paste and tomato soup. Then we have the indeterminate tomatoes that produce their fruit throughout the season, the better boys, the big boys, celebrity, and also the little grape and cherry tomatoes, like Sweet 100. That's a very good variety of cherry tomatoes. You have more of them if the plant's healthy, and you can get more of them. You know what to do with. Great to have. When you're planting tomatoes, there's also, you need to have what we call, we talked about resistant varieties. You'll see these letters V, F, and N. V is for verticillium, F is for fusarium. Those are two fungal wilt diseases. N are nematodes. So VF, VFN means they're resistant to these pest problems. Now, a lot of people say that the heirloom tomatoes taste better than these hybrid tomatoes. So, you know, that may be true. But the heirlooms won't have the resistance that these ones do. But they can still be grown and have very flavorful fruit. Many different types of tomatoes, as I was mentioning before. They can grow in containers. They're great for container growing as well. They do need to have some support, like a tomato cage or tied up to tomato stakes, because they are by nature kind of they're viney in nature. Pinching off where these little suckers that form in where it branches out, pinch them off. You can also root them and make some new tomato plants. Watermelons and cantaloupes, they grow similar to, I was talking to you about pumpkins. They need to have plenty of space to roam their vines, and as they start to mature, make sure you put them cardboard or pine straw or something to get them off the ground. One thing is very important, watermelon, and I meant to talk, is especially true with tomatoes, but can occur with watermelons and other cucurbits and peppers, is a condition called blossom end rot. What that is the end where the bottom of it, where the blossoms form, it starts to turn black and rot. That's caused by a calcium deficiency in the plant. That doesn't mean that there may be calcium available for the plant to absorb it, but it's having a hard time. And the main thing that causes that is uneven watering, where the ground gets real dry, you water it, then it gets real dry, you water it again, and that disrupts the calcium intake. So it's best to keep that soil evenly moist, and mulch is a good way to do that. But watermelons and cantaloupes, if you have the space, try growing those. They're easy to grow, they do pretty good. I had a picture here. This is a transplant from the Bonnie Plant Farm down in Union Springs, Alabama. I went down there about 4 years ago on a field trip. They grow these things and Bonnie has like 40 different sites throughout the country. But this is their Union Springs, which is sort of I guess about 40 or 50 miles southeast of Montgomery, Alabama. And these are really, these are very nice. They mass produce these things. They got a production system, and they have contracts with all the Home Depots, Lowe's, and Walmart, and other places that they deliver. There's another picture of looks like some mint plants. They grow. They're basically vegetables and herbs, what they grow. Not much of anything else. Well, I'm gonna stop and look for questions. Anybody got questions?
Tim, this is Gay. Your email address, please, to request the handouts.
Right there, tdaly@uga.edu.
Thank you.
I'm gonna put the chat box. Anybody can put a message there in the chat box. All right, well, you're free. That's my contact information. And make sure you can contact me if you have any questions. We'll have another webinar next week at this time, noon a week from today, which is April 20th, on the right plant for the right place, which is something that I teach to large numbers. Hold on just a minute. There's somebody for the check. All right. Well, good. Thank you, Mary. What we're going to do, we'll have it the right plant for the right place, which is the reason why that's something that I give talks to homeowners, master gardeners, and importantly, professionals. I had my last green industry update. I had a presentation for these professionals because, you know, putting the right plant in the right place is important. It's like lawn grasses. Bermuda grass is a tough grass. It can grow anywhere, but it can't, doesn't like shade. So we'll talk about that and other things. So any more questions? All right, that's my email address. Send me an email. I'll send you the publication, and I'll answer questions. Otherwise, let's go out there and get those gardens planted. It's time of the year, and I wish. Wait a minute. Hold on, just a minute. Let me come. I saw some more. Some questions. Let me. All right. Have a good afternoon, everybody.
Thanks, Tim.
People just saying thank you.